Literally, though, what are you left with? Well, you've got something. What's life like then, if you don't have the ability to enjoy it?
Experiences.
Yeah. Well, what are those experiences like? In other words, how are those things filtered through? Like, if you don't have the ability to enjoy it, then what's the mood or the attitude going to be that you go through life in?
You'd be like sad or like feel worse.
There's something is actually tied to boredom. What's that?
Misery.
Yeah, it's an in-between point where you go from bored to misery. There's a word for it. There's no English word for it. There's only I don't know an English word for it. I only know a French word for it. Called ennui, which is like a boredom that leads to despair and misery. In other words, you're so bored that you just can't like function. You can't, like, you lose track of time. You can't really, I don't know, it's hard to explain it in English, but you can't really experience life even. Like you can live, like you can breathe, but you can't experience things. You can't process things. What are you gonna say?
No, I know what I was thinking.
And so if that's the case, then you really can't live this way through ennui. And so it might be the case that he's talking about a very specific definition, or very specific understanding of what it is to live. Because when he says, like, I can't be a pessimist, I mean, it's almost like he's trying to convince, I don't know if he's trying to convince himself or convince the rest of us, or if he's saying something quite literal. But, if you've got these two options in life, pessimism and optimism. Now, does anybody in here like identify themselves as a pessimist? You're pessimistic? Yeah, why? I guess what I'm trying to ask is, do you think that the world really is the way that you see it? That it just lacks goodness?
No.
Okay, then there's hope. Because a pessimist will be somebody who typically, they'll use another word to describe themselves, oftentimes.
Like the realistic.
They say, I'm not a pessimist, I'm just realistic. This is the way that the world really is. An optimist will try to shape the world through their views. Because remember, none of us, as I've said before, none of us sees the world the way that it really is. We see the world the way that we are. And a lot of times, optimism it's a hope. You really hope that things are going to be better. They say, yeah, you can see the negative, and is it easy to see the negative? Yeah. You ask any 5-year-old to find stuff that's wrong with the world, and they can find it. It's there. The negative stuff is obvious. I was using an example yesterday. If you go into Google, it used to be, it might still be the case. If you go into Google and you type in "what is," a lot of times the first suggested search is "what is love," and it's a strange thing because we all kind of know what love is, but it's a weird thing for people to try to search it up to try to figure out what it is. And I wonder if any of you have ever wondered before if you were in love, or if you searched it up to find out. Now, have any of you ever been in intense suffering or misery, and you had to look up what is misery? You ever break your arm or something like that, and with your one good arm you're typing into Google, what is intense pain? Probably not, because you don't have to figure out, you know what that is. Everyone knows what that is. You don't have to Google search that. And so it occurs to us then that pain and suffering is an obvious and immediate fact about the world. It doesn't take a deep insight to find that. But what it does take oftentimes is a deep insight to find the positive, or to recognize the positive, and certainly a lot of times to enjoy the positive. A pessimist a lot of times will be a person who's in the middle of something really good and not be able to stop and say, this is really good. It'll be a person who sits there and says, wow, things are going to be really bad soon because they're good right now. That's as far as they can go. That's as far as the vision goes. And there can be a choice to be a pessimist. That's true. And that's why I was asking you those questions, because I'm wondering how much of it is a choice and how much of it is just like I just don't see it. Like I tried, but the difficulties of life are so obvious and apparent that I don't see it. And that's a true pessimist. If you're a person who's aware that the good is there, and you just can't quite grasp it or appreciate it yet, the word there being yet, then that means that there's hope there for you to become an optimist. If optimism is really a hope for the world, which it likely is. Yeah, so optimism is a hope. In other words, you see the best in things, and there are pure optimists who just see the best in things. Like I have a good friend of mine though, who's I refer to him as the eternal optimist, and this is a guy who I've known a long time, man, and he's just kind of been through the. Yeah, he was a really smart guy, but he was diagnosed with clinical depression when he was like 12 years old. And back then, I'm talking like, in the 90s or so, it wasn't like clinical depression now. Clinical depression now is like, oh, I'm sad. And the psychiatrist lines up and says, oh, then let me give you some meds for it. Everybody has something today. No, this wasn't the case back in the 90s. So this is a guy who, when he was 12, and typically they won't diagnose you with those things until you're an adult. They just would say, well, you're just growing up. You're just, which is pretty typical. When you're growing up, it's like, I feel awkward and uncomfortable. Yeah, that's part of growing up. And today we pathologize things and we just kind of hand out meds for that. But at this time, that wasn't the case. And so he went through so many things that he was finally diagnosed and said, yeah, you're clinically depressed. And then they sent him to a psychiatrist. They wanted to give him medication. And his mom wouldn't give him medication for it. She just said, no, because it affects brain development. Let's just see what happens. And he's been there for like 30 years, waiting to see what happens. And I talk to him every once in a while, and one of the things that struck me was that his mom used to always ask him like, how you doing? Are you okay? And she would always ask him like, something to the effect of like, why are you so down? Like she would know why, but she would just ask him, what's got you so down? And he would just tell her, I'll be better when I'm older. So he's like 13, 14, 16, 20, telling his mom, I'll be better when I'm older. And I remember the time I was talking to him, I'm like, are you any better? He's like, not yet. I think I'll be better when I'm older. But he's one of those guys, like I said, who just has like a really melancholy personality. You'd never know it. You talk to him, he seems like the happiest dude in the world, and he is happy. And yet he's also melancholy. He's a weird paradox. It's one of the reasons I talk to him, because he's so interesting like that. But he's never gotten any medication, anything like that. And I referred to him as the eternal optimist. And I asked him, like, what's got you so optimistic? And he says, I love humanity. Why? You don't really, like, connect with people, though. Like, you seem like, he describes himself as being alienated. Like, he feels like he's always alone, even when he's never really alone. He's always got people around him, but even in groups, he feels alienated. Like, he doesn't really, like, fit in, But he does a great job of fitting in. You'd never know it. And he just said, yeah, I've learned how to, like, kind of how to fit in because it seemed to make people happy. And he just he just loves humanity. He loves people. And so when I asked him how he's gonna, if he's doing better, he says, no, not yet, but I will. And I call him the eternal optimist because he's eternally optimistic. He really thinks that things are gonna work out, and things are gonna be better, things are gonna be better, things are gonna be better. And I don't wanna you can look at him and just go like, I don't know, man, he's in his 40s now, and I'm like, so like, when are things gonna get better? And he always says the same thing, when I'm older, they will be. And I've asked him finally, like, so how can you, like, why are you so optimistic? And he just said, I mean, things have to get better, right? That's all he said. He just shrugged his shoulders and nods and goes, they have to get better, right? They can't stay bad, right? They've got to get better. And that's the thing that keeps him going forward. And you can see that's an active optimism. He's trying really hard to be optimistic. He really, really, really wants to see the best in things. And he does. He sees the best in people. He sees the best in situations. He sees the best in everything. Probably except for himself. And maybe that's his issue. But like I said, that's an active optimism. There's also an active pessimism, a person who just absolutely refuses to see the good in things. Most people aren't those. Most people are kind of like that in between. You see the negative in things because that's just your personality, and you probably describe yourself as a realist. You can maybe see the positive in things, and so what do? Well, that's just what you do. You see the positive in things. But When he's talking here, he's saying he can't be because he's alive. Yeah, he's forced to be an optimist because what's the alternative? And what he's getting at here is that to be optimistic is to be alive, because the only reason to be alive is if you think that things can get better. When we talk about suicide, suicide is not something that people do just because they're sad, just because they're melancholy, just because they're depressed. Suicide is a thing that people do because they're hopeless. If you, I don't know, anybody ever have a headache that's like really, really bad? And like, or you ever, especially if you ever had a migraine before. And if you ever get those and like you struggle to remember a time in your life when you didn't have a migraine? Yeah, you've only had it for like half an hour or an hour, and you're laying there going like, there was never a time in my life when I didn't suffer from this intense pain. And then, I don't know, if you, like I get migraines, and then I'll just cover my face up with like washcloths and things and put ice around my head, and then close my, and I fall asleep. And then when I wake up, I feel much better. I'm just hungry. And then I'm like, wow, that was so terrible. I feel so much better now. And then that gratitude like wears off after like the next hour or so, and I go back to living like normal until the next migraine. If you've gotten those. I wonder if you've ever been in such intense pain at one moment that you just thought, if this pain continues for, I mean, if I had to live with this pain, I wouldn't live with this pain. I would just end it. That's a hopelessness. People who commit suicide do it because of a sense of hopelessness. They think that things are never going to get better. That's why, by and large, suicide is an illness or disease of the very young and the very wealthy. Poor people don't usually commit suicide. And it makes sense, because if you're poor in your life, you've probably overcome a lot of struggles. You're still living in the struggles. I should say you've overcome them, you survived them to that point. But imagine, and when you're very young, you don't have a frame of reference. It seems like right now is all there is. And so if you're suffering right now, it seems like things are never going to get better. But as you get older, you start to realize that these things too shall pass. You get better. Things do get better. You just have to stick around long enough to see it get better. And then wealthy people, why do they commit suicide? Because imagine like if you have everything that you think you want. You're comfortable, you have all the material things you want, you don't have to worry about things, and yet you still feel empty and meaningless. That's why that happens there. Because you think, wow, if I have everything that I want, and yet I still feel empty, well then I'm never going to feel fulfilled. But of course, in that case there, it's the same thing. You lack a perspective. You don't have everything that you need. You don't have meaning. You don't have purpose. You have stuff, you have the means, but you have no meaning. And so, it's perspective. It's hopelessness. And so if you're going to be alive, he's getting at, I'm forced to be an optimist. Why? Because otherwise, what's the alternative? Be a pessimist and die. So I'm forced to believe that we can survive, whatever we must survive. Because there are things in your life that you don't have to go through. Think about so much of the sufferings of our lives. How much of it is really because of stuff that we bring upon ourselves? That's the hard stuff. Like the stuff that is put upon us. Those are obstacles that we overcome. But you pile obstacles up in front of yourself, and then you realize you put the obstacles there. Those aren't the things that you must survive. Those are the things that we make our own lives more difficult. And so, overcome the things, or I guess endure the things that you have to endure. The things that you don't have to endure, don't endure. If there's a thorn bush in front of you, don't walk through it. You don't have to. Walk around it. If you're eating a banana or a cucumber and it's bitter, well, throw it away. Don't ask, why is this thing so terrible, and keep eating it. Don't ask, why are these thorns so sharp as they're cutting you up as you walk through the bush. If you can avoid it, avoid it. And if not, then endure it, because you can't avoid it. Questions, comments, concerns, complaints, criticisms, critiques?